in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome back to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. We're going to do a little sort of mini episode, or however long it takes, on something that came up in the literature really recently, actually, a June 9th publication on taurine. And actually, our executive producer here, Ben Hyatt, is the one who sent me the article. So we're gonna talk about it. Ben, how are you?
So far, so good. I am very curious about this. So if
Yeah.
I should be taking it. Taurine is in energy drink.
Yeah. So this is probably important to point out, right? Because so taurine is in a lot of these energy drinks that the kids these days that they drink, like in Red Bull, Monster, these kinds of things. And just to point out, just to be very clear, I don't know what else is in those drinks, but the stuff that's not bad for you and potentially really good for you is taurine. But that is something that's in there. But yeah, it's an interesting. So what did you gather from I guess the questions you sent it to me, and what did you?
I sent it to you, and it seemed like it was like breaking news kind of thing. That all of a sudden that taurine can help you live longer. So
yeah, right.
That was.
So when I looked at it at first, here's the thing, that what we knew about taurine already, right? Like we knew that from previous studies that taurine levels do seem to go down as we age. And we also know that there's also been some suggestions that in areas like Japan, Okinawa, Japan, in these blue zones, that for whatever reason, these don't go down with age quite as much or quite as rapidly as they do in non-blue zones. We also know, for example, that in adults who are 60 years old, their taurine levels are at about, say, 1/3 of a child. So there's something there. Now, this is something that I think is really gives us an opportunity to discuss first and foremost this idea that correlation does not equal causation. You've heard that?
I have definitely heard that.
Tell me what you think I mean by that. I mean, as a smart guy, but not as a physician.
Yeah. So correlation. So just because something, levels in an older person is not the same as a kid doesn't necessarily mean anything, right?
It doesn't really mean anything. It could just be some sort of. It could be something that's just following something else, right? It could just be a signal of something else that's deteriorating in the body. So it may not be the taurine itself, for example, that is effectively going down and making somebody less feeble or more feeble and older. It could just be the result of something else downstream, in which case it makes it pretty much meaningless, right? I mean, it's just. So that's the thing that I think this study was really actually quite good at delineating.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So taurine is an amino acid?
Yeah, so it's actually one of the most abundant amino acids in the body. Okay. We make it. We also get it from like chicken, turkey, bologna, all these things like that.
Bologna.
Yeah.
Okay, so does a study tell us anything new then that we didn't know?
Yeah, so it was actually interesting. It's an animal study, and it was done at Columbia, and Yadav et al. Was the author, and it was in Science. So this is a real journal, right? This is not some kind of joke kind of thing that's out there in popular press or something like that. So it's real information. But basically what they did was something really interesting, is they took mice. So they did this in not just mice, but they also studied in monkeys and worms as well. And we'll get back to why that might be important. But what they did is they were taking levels of taurine levels of mice, and then during at around mice middle age.
Right. What is mice middle age?
I understand it's about 14 months.
Okay.
And so around 14 months, they looked at where those taurine levels were. They looked at how those animals were faring and all those kinds of things. And then they started to supplement their diet with taurine. And so that is a really interesting way to do this, right? Because now you're actually seeing taurine levels go down, and you're saying, well, okay, we know taurine levels are going down and this animal might be declining in age, but could we reverse it? by adding taurine. And so they started adding taurine to the diets of these mice.
Not all the mice, just half the mice. Is that how they do it?
Well, they had control groups and all
Okay.
that's true, but what happened is that they started adding taurine at middle-aged mice, and they effectively found out that in doing so, they could increase the lifespan of these animals by about 10 to 12%, which is pretty significant, right? I mean, in humans, if you had a 90-year-old, you're just adding almost another decade to that, right? So that's kind of a big deal. And even probably more important or more useful to know about it was that that correlated with those taurine levels going up, and it also correlated with a healthier animal.
Okay.
So it wasn't just living longer, but you had all of these improvements in organs, that would suggest the animal was younger biologically, with improved functioning bone and muscle, gut function, inflammation, things like that. So, and again, the same type of thing that they showed with mice was also shown in monkeys and worms. And that's really an interesting thing, because I guess, the easiest way to think about this with multiple animal models is that, like, it just gives you more and more evidence that this is that this is like a universal thing on how things work for for animals in general, right? So if it works in worms, it works in mice, and it works in monkeys, and monkeys, by the way, are as close as it gets to us, right? Then it probably is going to work in humans,
Okay.
right? So that's why it was kind of a big deal.
Longevity is improving. They're finding in mice, monkeys, worms. What's the mechanism behind it? Do they think?
Yeah, and not only longevity, but again, health span too,
Health
right?
span.
Like the health span is increasing. So there's a few things that are that they showed as mechanisms, certainly possible mechanisms that they're showing. And one was there's a reduced level of cellular senescence. Now, cellular senescence,
It's a
I know.
new word.
Yeah, I know,
For me.
senescence. So, okay, so as we age, what happens is that we have these cells in our bodies that will replicate over and over again, and then they'll die, right? That's like a normal thing in our human bodies, and that's when you have cancer, for example, these cells just go on and they live forever, and they just that they become tumors and that kind of thing, right? There's something in between, which are senescent cells. And basically what happens there is that you have replication stops, and all of a sudden these cells are just kind of lingering. They're not growing, they're not replicating. They're called zombie cells in layman's terms, because they're basically just kind of like the living dead, right? Like that's literally kind of what they are. And the problem with zombie cells or senescent cells here is that they tend to release other kinds of chemicals and growth factors around that makes other cells around them turn into zombie cells. And when that happens, some of the thought there is that there may be they may contribute to the formation of various cancers and stuff. By the way, rodents' #1 cause of death is cancer. So that
Is
would
it
make,
really?
yeah, that would make a lot of sense, right?
Right.
Another mechanism that the taurine is postulated to benefit is DNA damage, decreasing DNA damage, and part of that DNA damage also includes protecting against something called telomerase deficiency. So what happens as we get older again is our chromosomes, as they divide, the chromosomes are like the things, the long things with all the DNA in them. You get, half from your mom, half from your dad, and they continue to divide, and they will naturally shorten over time, and telomerase actually prevents that shortening, because shortening ultimately allows for a level of damage on those chromosomes. And again, damaged DNA, damaged chromosomes, typically what you're looking at there,
Mutations and
mutations, cancer,
right.
things like that. That's really that. There was also some evidence that that the mitochondria were less suppressed in animals that were given taurine. And then there was a lot less inflammation. So there's all of these things. Like inflammation is a big thing as well, right? Like inflammation is huge in terms of like overall. So again, this is stuff that's really interesting. And as an aside, they also showed in this study that like, just going back to that correlation causation thing, that if you go back and you look at population studies that decreased taurine levels are associated with increased obesity, hypertension, inflammation, type 2 diabetes. So basically, all of these things are all correlated, right? And this is taking it one step in animals and saying, well, it's not just correlation. There's some potential causation here. Okay. So of course we don't really have evidence in humans, but this is pretty exciting stuff. Enough, to be honest, I was on a little bit of taurine already, tiny little bit.
You take it as a supplement, or is it? It's a supplement.
Yeah, I don't take a bunch of power drinks, but
yeah, exactly.
The not sugar. Against them, but no, I've done that in the past.
What is it? It's caffeine and sugar and all that stuff, right?
It's all sorts of other stuff, and I don't think caffeine's necessarily the bad thing in the morning either. But there's all sorts of other chemicals in those things that I don't know, that probably are not particularly good for you. But I started taking, just going off of the dosing that they did, it comes out to maybe about 5 or 6 grams.
So it's a small
taurine.
amount.
It's not a huge amount. I mean, that ends up being like 5 pills or 6 pills or something like that. So I was convinced enough by this study that I actually started adding that as a supplement.
Okay. Interesting. And it's naturally occurring in your body anyways, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a natural amino acid. Like I said, you get it from turkey and chicken and all that kind of stuff too. But I mean, I didn't really see a downside. And, from an animal study, this is pretty good stuff.
Okay, awesome. And again, not medical advice, but...
It is not medical advice. And what I do on me is purely experimental.
Yeah. So far, so good, right?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
I think we'll see.
Yeah.
But again, that's a good point. Nothing that we talk about on this show, as you know, Ben, is medical advice. Despite the fact that I am qualified to give you medical advice, I am basically doing sort of a high level, sort of, I hate to call it biohacking, because I don't, there's a lot of voodoo in that space that I don't ascribe to. Not all of it's voodoo, but there is a lot of voodoo, potential voodoo.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do here is take basic science, take clinical science, and try to figure out actually the things that there's evidence for that might be worth trying. And I didn't really see a downside here, and I see a lot of potential upside.
Yep. Awesome.
So you're going to start it?
I'm going to start it. Sounds good to me.
Fantastic. Anyway, that's it. This was a nice little, I felt like this was something that you should probably know about sooner rather than later. It was just published. So, look it up. It's in Science. And if you don't read medical journals, I'm sure if you Google it, taurine, and you can see probably a bunch of different articles. There might be in, I think the one you sent.
I saw it in Time magazine.
And some of the other articles. So anyway, that's it for this little episode. This is Buck Joffrey with Sapio.